give a quick review, since there's been a lot to digest today. We start with attraction. What is attraction? Attraction status. How do women determine attraction? They determine determine status. They determine status by how we see ourselves. How do we see ourselves? Typically, we see ourselves as inadequate, which causes us to overcompensate, do unattractive things, say douchey lines, be too nice, be too much of an asshole, etc., etc. The actual mechanisms that cause us to behave in these ways are the defense mechanisms of avoidance, intellectualization, blame and anger, and indifference, and then the coping mechanisms of becoming codependent or becoming narcissistic. And basically the idea is to get away from performance-based behaviors in your social situations as much as possible. Now, this is easier said than done. Now, we've identified some of our defense mechanisms, identified some of our unhealthy beliefs that are holding us back. So now, how do we start acting without performing? How do we start behaving and communicating without performing? Now, when I talk to guys about this stuff, usually at some point around now, somebody asks a question or they kind of have a criticism. They say, hey, Mark, we all want to make good impressions. We all want to be liked. We all want to be impressive. What's wrong with that? Isn't that normal? And it's true. It is normal. We all do, all things being equal, we all do want to be liked. We all want to make a good impression. We all want people to laugh at our jokes and think we're a cool guy and have things go well. And that is normal. So where's the problem? Where's the difference between simply wanting to make a good impression and actually performing? Actually doing performance-type behaviors, overcompensating. The difference is, we mentioned it briefly earlier, the difference is congruence. The difference is intention. As I was telling one of the guys earlier, taking a picture of yourself in front of a big house, there's nothing wrong with that. But the reason you're taking a picture of yourself in front of a big house is to impress other people, then it becomes a performance and it becomes unattractive. There's nothing wrong with saying a funny joke or playing guitar or getting a bunch of tattoos. But if you're doing these things to impress other people, to make other people like you, if your intentions are based externally instead of internally, as genuine expressions, then it becomes performance and it becomes unattractive. And this leads us into authenticity. Authenticity is the opposite of performance. And the key to authenticity is that it is done unconditionally. In my book, I describe it as doing something as a gift. So let me give you an example. One of the pieces of advice I give is I encourage men to be very direct with their interest and state their interest clearly. Say, I think you're attractive, I like you. Or say, you're cute, let's go on a date. Now, a lot of men take that and they're like, oh, that's a good line, I'm going to use that line. And so they go out and they start saying that, and I'll get emails and they'll be mad. They'll be like, oh, well, I used the whole line about her being cute and wanting to go on a date, and she shut me down. What's the problem? Because it's inauthentic. It's done with conditions. He's saying it because he wants a certain response. I gave you the story earlier about me fucking up a magic trick over and over again. What was unattractive about that? I mean, you could probably imagine a scenario where I fucked up a magic trick and they would just laugh and there'd be no problem. Why was it so unattractive? Why did it make me look so lame? it made me look lame because it was clear that my intentions were to impress them. I was trying to perform for them. And they could sense that, and it made me unattractive. Girls talk about creepiness. And creepiness is kind of this like big word that everybody says, but like, can anybody define creepiness? It's just there's no definition other than unattractive. Like you can't, nobody can put in the words what creepiness is. It's just you know it when you see it. Like, oh, that guy's creepy. But you don't know why. You don't know what he's saying. Like, you know, one guy, it's like that other story I told you in the club, saying the exact same thing to one group of girls who adored me, say it to another group of girls, and suddenly I'm creepy. But creepiness comes down to intention. It's when you're doing things conditionally. It's when you are sharing yourself with the expectation that she give you something back, or that she likes you, or that you get some sort of response. Performance, basically. So the goal is to strive for authenticity. It's to behave and express yourself in ways in which you're not looking for a response. It means being congruent to how you feel and what you believe. And we're going to see a little bit today, but mostly tomorrow, how powerful this actually ends up becoming. You know, the idea of, I mean, just even the question of, if you were never concerned again if people approved of you, what would you say, what would you do? Like, even that question by itself is insanely powerful. Like, you really have to think hard and long about that. Because so many of us have spent such a great percentage of our energy in our lives doing things for approval. It's ingrained in our culture. We're always graded, we're always measured, we're always judged against one another. And so it's ingrained for us to behave and to pursue things not based on what we genuinely are emotionally invested in, what we are genuinely passionate about, but what we think others will approve of. Authenticity, though, it can get a little bit complicated. I got an email about 6 months ago. There's a guy who coaches pickup in Boston, actually. He's kind of a small-time guy. He just does things locally. I was aware of him, but I didn't really know him very well. But he sent me an email about 6 months ago, and he was a little upset. And he'd been doing this for years. He would get laid a lot. He'd go out all the time. I mean, he was to the point where, you know, he dealt with most of his anxiety. He could get laid. He could talk to people. But he emailed me, and he said, you know, a lot of the girls that I pick up have told me over the years that they say I'm not real, that I'm not real with them. And he said that I always just thought they were testing me or fucking with me. He said I never really took it seriously. He said, but recently, like the last year, my friends have started complaining too that I'm not being real with them, that I'm not being upfront with them. And he said, I don't know what to do because in my mind, I'm being completely real. He says, in my mind, he said, I'm over my anxiety. I'm fine. I'm not trying to impress people. I get laid. I'm happy with my social life. I've got things to do. In my mind, I'm being totally real. I've spent years learning these behaviors, and I'm successful at them, and I'm comfortable with them. Yet people are telling me that I'm not real. So I thought about it, and I sent him a response. And basically, when people say, Mark, you're not being real, or Bob, you're not being real, what we mean is that we perceive their motivations and their actions to be disconnected. It's like what I was talking about earlier with the guy who He's making fun of the girl, but she's the only girl he's talking to. It's when our feelings and our motivations are disconnected from our actions. And there are two ways that can happen. One is that you are consciously performing, like we've been talking about all day today. But his email to me got me thinking on even a deeper level. Because I started thinking, what if he's been performing things for so long, he doesn't even remember that they're performances? Like, if you aren't even aware of your own emotions, then you can't be congruent with them. It gets blurry, it's fuzzy. The way, good way to think of it is, let's say those are your feelings and your motivations. That's like how you feel, what you think, what you believe. Call them intentions. And then this is what you perceive your own feelings and beliefs to be. Because a lot of us kid ourselves, right? A lot of us, what we learned earlier, is that a lot of us build bullshit beliefs and defense mechanisms up, so that we actually, our vision of our own emotions and motivations gets blurred. So this would be self-awareness. And then on top of that, if we're performing, performance comes out like this. And so this is incongruent. Does that make sense? Now, in an instance like our coaching friend who emailed me, he might have a situation like this. The gap between his behavior and his self-perception, his self-awareness, there's no gap there. But because his self-awareness is so clouded from his emotions, he has inaccurate awareness of his own emotions and motivations, he still comes off as incongruent and unattractive. So developing an honest self-awareness is necessary. In my book, when I talk about authenticity, I refer to it primarily as honesty. So, when you are, the idea with honesty is to remove that gap between the thoughts and feelings that you're aware of and what you actually express. But in my book, I also say that part of honesty is being honest with yourself. If you're not able to be honest with yourself, then you can't ever express yourself honestly. I'll give you an example. So I told you earlier, after my ex-girlfriend, I was very angry. And I was very angry, I felt very inadequate, and so around the same time I discovered the pickup stuff, and so I had a huge motivation. I just wanted to get out there and just fuck everything. And it wasn't, there was no joy to it. It was like anger. It was like, I'm going to fuck everything. And the thing is, though, is I didn't see this. To my self-awareness, I was a fun party guy. I was going out every night, just drinking, having a blast, flirting with girls. I didn't see it. And it wasn't until I actually got intimate with girls, got them in bed, that a lot of this anger would start coming out. And a lot of my defense mechanisms started coming out. I started getting angry and be like, she didn't call me back. She's such a cunt. Fuck her. She thinks she can fuck with my emotions like that. Forget her. I'm not calling her again. I start saying bad stuff about them to their friends. And I didn't see it. I couldn't see it. And I remember it's one of the first girls that I really, once I started getting success, I met a girl that I had a lot of chemistry with. And I remember she came over one night, we slept together, and then we were I guess we were doing pillow talk. Like, we stayed up in bed and we were talking for a while. And somehow, I don't remember how, but somehow my ex-girlfriend came up. The subject of my ex came up. And I just went on this 20-minute tirade about she's such a lying whore, and then she did this, and then she fucked me over this way. And I just went on and on and on. And it was totally unconscious. I didn't even realize I was doing it. And I had one of those moments, sometimes when you're talking, and then all of a sudden, you're like, wait, I've been talking for a long time. It's a little bit awkward. It started to get a little bit awkward. I'm like, wait, I've been talking for a long time, and I stopped. And her eyes were this big. She was horrified. And there was an awkward silence. And I asked her, I said, that annoying question that women always ask us. I said, what are you thinking? And she was like, I think you told me too much. And I was like, oh, crap. And that was the moment I realized. I realized, I'm really angry. I didn't notice it before, but I started thinking back about a lot of these experiences. It's I'm an angry dude. I'm not over this. And that's actually what inspired me to check myself into therapy. So I'm angry about this stuff, and I had no idea. And so because I wasn't aware of that anger, it was impossible, or it wasn't impossible, but my congruence was far less. So I may think I'm being a happy, fun, lucky guy, but really, underneath, I was angry. And so ultimately, the type of women I was attracting were also incongruent and also had anger issues going on. You always attract the emotional makeup of yourself. Always. How do we develop this self-awareness within ourselves? How do we get a better understanding of what we're thinking, what we're feeling? And generally, as men in our culture, I'll spare you the sermon, but men in our culture, we're encouraged to actually get rid of self-awareness, get rid of emotional awareness as much as possible. In our culture, if we're worried or concerned about how we feel, if we're upset or sad or depressed, and we focus on that and inhabit that consciously and want to talk about it, in our culture, we're shamed for that. And so most of us grow up and spend most of our lives avoiding that and actually trying to not be aware of that because we've always been punished for that. But the truth is you can't live as a whole man with true confidence. You can't develop that self-esteem necessary for true confidence, that ability to be authentic and to be completely attractive in any given moment. You can't develop that without integrating your emotional self. If you're not aware of when you're angry, then that's going to come out in your relationships. And it's going to attract the wrong women to yourself. If you're unaware of when you're sad or upset, and you have a defense mechanism of blaming the people close to you for your sadness, you're not going to be able to express yourself authentically, and you're going to attract the wrong women to you. So the way we develop greater self-awareness is through practicing vulnerability. And I had a slide for that, but it disappeared. And for any of you guys who have read my book, you know, vulnerability is like kind of the cornerstone of most of the stuff I talk about. And a lot of men have kind of a negative, as soon as they hear vulnerability, they're like, ugh, I don't want to do that. We associate vulnerability with weakness. We associate it with being a pussy, sitting in a corner, crying. But that's not true. And actually, the research shows that, first of all, vulnerability encompasses a much broader scale of behaviors. But it also leads to, as we'll see, all sorts of things. Greater emotional health, greater relationships, ability to be bold, comfort with your sexuality, better, more intimate connections, higher self-esteem. Vulnerability is connected with all of these things.